Thanks, everyone. I guess I wanted to start it off with, a quick story as to why I'm interested in CSV. As a sustainability professional, and there are other sustainability professionals in the audience, I don't know if you have the same frustrations that I've had over the last sort of 10 years. When people ask me what do you do, and I say I'm a sustainability consultant, their eyes, they just glaze over. And you could be at a barbecue, you could be talking to the CEO, end of conversation, that's it, nothing. When you change that conversation to how does a company go about creating commercial and social value by what it does, I have instant engagement on that conversation. Interest, it's instantaneous excitement of, oh my God, how do you do that? I'm more interested in that. And to me, that's probably one of the most powerful concepts or aspects to CSV. I agree with Dirk, there are many issues with the framework of CSV, and the claim of, Porter wanting to fix capitalism is a very large ask. But I do think that CSV has also created some other potential or important benefits. The other one would be around reframing sustainability, which has been very much around impacts and managing impacts of an organisation, through to how we actually create value. It's not to say that the impacts that we create aren't important, but it does change the way that you engage with the business. It means you have to understand the business, you have to understand customers, and you have to understand how each of your sustainability programs is actually going to contribute to value, and that's the business case. The managing impacts, yes, it reduces costs, but that's not sexy, and that doesn't engage the C-suite. So today, I wanted to talk around some of our draft insights from research we've been conducting over the last few months, looking at 8 companies in Australia. Is that the one? Excellent. So 8 companies in Australia, leading companies in Australia. And I guess some of the issues that we wanted to talk about through our paper and the questions around in the local market around criticisms or scepticism around CSV have been around 4 key areas. The first one is, how do you create shared value in a mature market? If you've read all the research, most of the examples that are provided are very much bottom of the pyramid, happening in Africa, Asia, etc. But what does the concept mean in the Australian marketplace, particularly when we're 66% of the GDP is from services? So really interested in that. And that's, I guess, what the area we're going to focus on in the conversation today. But also interested to understand, there's a lot of examples that are put out there in the marketplace around this is an example of CSV, and I think there needs to be some more work around what that criteria is that defines CSV. And we would have, we're investigating and we haven't completed this, but, it has to create commercial value, has to create social value, has to be something that's scalable, but you have to have had strategic intent to do it. And whether the examples we talk through today meet all of those criteria, we haven't run the complete analysis on that, but it's no doubt that these companies have created both commercial and social value. An important point is that we don't think CSV is here to replace philanthropy or CSR or sustainability. We do think it is a complementary concept. Okay, so some of the leading companies that we have been working with, Stockland, Nestle, Toyota, PwC, BT, which is part of the Westpac Group, Lion Nathan, well, they're now called Lion, and NAB. Now, each of the initiatives that we've been looking at cover, obviously, a range of sectors, but they also cover the different types of CSV. I won't go through these in detail, but to say that, we have most of the examples we've looked at really fit into the reconceiving products and services. So how are the companies actually going to use these initiatives to increase revenue for the organisation? And, you can see there, NAB with microfinance, PwC, Indigenous Consulting, BT with a superannuation product. And then we have a smaller number of organisations that sit in the, cluster. How do clusters actually help secure the supply chain? And a great example from Nestle, and a controversial one from Toyota, which unfortunately we don't get time to talk about today, but happy to talk about that one in more detail later. So I want to get across this important point that I think that innovation is critical to actually achieving shared value, and that shared value is also critical to innovation. And I think this aspect of innovation is really important. All the innovation literature will say that, why does a company need to innovate? Well, 3/4 of the S&P 500, they're not going to be here in 20 years' time. So that says something with the need that for an organisation to survive, they need to innovate, and they need to innovate rapidly. And I think that's a key concept that Porter also talks about in his paper, that need for innovation. But I think in the Porter work and the subsequent work from FSG with Mark Feiser's paper is very much focused on the technical or structural aspects of how a company innovates. So things around how you integrate into legacy businesses, creating semi-autonomous units, obtaining support from government, etc. But I think through our research, one of the most critical aspects that's come through is that the ability for a company to innovate really comes down to its people. It's the culture and the people within the organisation that enable it to innovate. And that is something much deeper, it's cultural, that goes beyond the technical ways and the frameworks of how you establish an organisation. So, what makes a company good at innovation? So as I said, we think it's the people, and through each of the examples we've worked through, it was very much people were at the core of this ability to innovate. It was their sense of purpose, the learning and creativity, and the ability to share ideas and to talk about how they were going to create shared value. And I think it's the people that create that high-performing organisation. This diagram is really to show it at the essence that a company needs to invest in its people in order for them to think outside the box and to create this sort of a learning environment that's actually looking externally for ideas as well as internally. And it is very much centred around the stakeholder. So, from our research, and I don't have a lot of time today to talk into a lot of detail of our findings, but we did come up with, at this stage, 6 really key findings that we think are the foundations for how an organisation enables them to innovate and innovate for shared value. And we're going to go through each of these in sort of a high-level detail. But there is a paper we've released, and it does go into more detail and welcome your feedback and thoughts. So, the first one is this idea of creating a new mental model. I don't think this is necessarily a new idea. It's talked a lot about in the literature from a range of different people from both the business management and academia. But it's this idea of the ability for an organisation to adapt. And for each of the organisations we've looked at, there is some level of a new mental model that occurs. I think that the existing way that an organisation or traditional way that an organisation operates has very much been around incremental change, very much around how do we make our organisation more efficient, or the back-end processes more efficient. We're good at what we do, how do we get better? And then by that way we make more money through cost efficiencies. But that's a very incremental change. It's not about transformative or substantial innovation. To actually go to that next level of innovation requires this cultural change where you have a very good understanding of the customer and the customer needs, and that's that humanistic approach. The ability to adapt and to enable your organisation to embrace new thinking. And it's also, crucially, this diffusion of power and the flexibility of leadership within the organisation. And we're going to touch a bit more on that as we go through. And, when you look at this is, seems very simple, but it's not simple. It is actually a huge cultural change. If it was something that was simple, companies like Kodak, who knew the change was coming, they knew they had to innovate, something prevented them from actually making that jump. And, I think in part is this ability to have that new mental model and make that cultural change. So the second one is having this team of leaders at all levels of the organisation. So there is no doubt that in all the organisations we looked at, there was a very important part around the ability, the role of leadership as opposed to management within an organisation. It's very clear that the CEO sets the tone of the organisation, its purpose, its vision and its values. But they not only do they set that vision, they also have the ability to provide that supportive environment, which empowers employees to be able to think creatively and actually give them the power to think about possibilities and new ideas. And a strong, powerful CEO will enable that sort of culture to thrive in their organisation. And it's about the social entrepreneur, so those people within your organisation who come up with those ideas, who can lead the charge to take them through to idea development and execution. But it needs the role and the help of the CEO to actually enable that to happen. And those entrepreneurs, they're supported by a team of highly of expertise, of functional people from IT, legal, etc., that can help execute that idea. The third one is around having this really intimate understanding of your stakeholders, and in particular customers. I think most annual reports these days and strategies of organisations will say, we want to be customer-centric. We're all about the customers, focused on the customer. But in the work that we're seeing and work that we do in our consultancy, there's questions over whether companies really understand what it means to understand their customer. Do they really understand the needs, expectations, desires and aspirations of their customers? They have a huge amount of data, but it may not be the right data that enables them to have these insights. And through the work that we did, and some of the organisations we have worked with through this research are using design thinking as a very powerful tool to help them have these very strong connections with the customers. This design thinking process is a very iterative process. It's the process that companies like Atlassian and Apple, etc., and IDEO are using to help them actually innovate fast, and develop ideas that actually connect with the customer. And it requires actually a lot of qualitative work with those customers and testing the feasibility, the desirability and the viability of each of those ideas. Measuring value. This is the holy grail. If you can measure the value that an organisation is actually creating, the total value in terms of economic, social, environmental, you're doing a great job. This is the part that I guess all organisations are really struggling with. And the work that we've been doing at Net Balance through the Research Institute is very much looking at how can we help companies to measure value. There's been a lot of work through sustainability and global reporting initiatives and other frameworks to help companies to measure the impact that they're having. But then the next evolution is, how does a company actually measure the value they're creating? And that's a key underpinning part to the shared value space. Porter and Kramer haven't got that worked out yet, and I think if you look at their papers, it's very, very high level, and we have engaged with FSG around our ideas on measurement, and there's some great creative tension there. So what we're proposing is we've developed up the total value framework, and I don't have time to go into a lot of the detail of that today, but it's very heavily underpinned by the integrated reporting framework, as you can see. And the idea here is to actually split out and make very explicit the different types of value that a company is creating. Financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social and relationship, and natural capital. And we've done this work for a number of companies, and it's been very successful in actually highlighting the different types of value that's being created. We're only measuring the most material value, and also the value created for different stakeholders, not just the shareholder, but for a range of stakeholders. And some of the results can be uncomfortable for organisations because who they thought they were creating value for isn't actually their target audience in the end of the day. We're going to be exploring more around how this framework works in practice, and writing a paper up on it. but it is very heavily based on that stakeholder engagement and the use of supporting frameworks such as program logic, social return on investment, as well as another piece we've been working on in terms of how you measure the commercial return you get from your social investment. Okay. The fifth area is this idea of collaboration, and I think that came across quite strongly in the Porter and Kramer work, but they talked more about partnerships with an external focus, and I think our work has really shown that the success of innovation and the ability to execute those ideas has very much come down to these cross-functional teams that organisations are having. Some of the companies, the way that they actually innovate, and if you think about traditional innovation, a company, people think of this R&D division, it's a black box, money goes in, nothing comes out, everyone questions the worth of it. These organisations are actually developing up specialised teams that work from across the business, and they're brought onto a project for a short amount of time. And they have specialists from IT, legal, design, product, etc., all working together to develop up these ideas. They have the mandate from senior leadership, they have protection to work on this, and it's their full-time job to work on these ideas to execution. And they have KPIs that are very commercially focused, as well as that social focus. What we also found is some organisations that didn't take this approach, who have people trying to do this in their day jobs, the time it takes to actually execute the innovation is much longer, which means if we're talking about innovation being a competitive advantage, they're potentially missing out on that advantage. We also had a great deal of feedback around also the relationships and how you work together across those cross-functional teams. Okay. And the last point here is around integrating the social purpose into your company to make it an authentic company. I think this starts to touch on some of the questions that the audience and Dick had raised around the ethical aspects of a company. And in particular, Coca-Cola or Nestle having sugary products, but in other cases they're developing a shared value proposition for some of their products. And I think, this was a really interesting finding from the work in terms of there are some companies that we're working with, such as Lion, who have actually brought that strategic purpose into their vision. And they've actually turned down different business propositions and ideas, which would have made a lot of money for them, but they didn't align with their social purpose. And they saw that social purpose and living to that social purpose and being authentic to it as absolutely so important. If they weren't authentic as a company, then their employees couldn't be authentic, and then their products were not authentic. And they had tested this in the market, and they'd had the feedback from a number of customers who questioned the authenticity of some of their products. And as a consequence, they've changed the way that they've measured their strategy. This needs some more work, but I think this idea of authenticity is important in the shared value space, and that I think most companies that are in CSV at the moment, they're not a CSV company, but they're trialling it across a number of different pilots and projects. There are a few that are actually at the CSV company level stage, and from an innovation perspective, it makes perfect sense that it's going to take a long time to be a CSV company. Okay. All right. Key steps to kickstart shared value innovation in your company. Here are just some sort of thoughts that I guess as a sustainability professional I found useful. This idea of reframing your role from being about risk and impact to how you can actually create value in your organisation. It doesn't mean you don't do the impact stuff, but I think it reframes the way that you engage with the business. And I think that a lot of the innovation we saw in these examples, these were sustainability people who were engaged with people from across the business. There were fewer ideas that actually came straight from the sustainability team. And I think that's, sustainability professionals need to be very close to the business and understanding it to really make an impact. The next one is that, in terms of having an intimate understanding of your stakeholders, particularly your customers, and understanding these sort of what's the desirability, the feasibility and the viability of those initiatives. And many business cases actually start with the bottom, the viability. Let's test the viability. But if you haven't actually established the desirability, then you're almost wasting your time. And that was key to actually the selling case or the business case within organisations. Those who were selling their innovation effectively started with desirability, and they touched something personal to the executive that was sitting around the team, who went, yes, that's a problem for me. Yes, that's a great idea. Okay, now we'll talk about the numbers. And I guess the last point there is that, we do see shared value as an important evolution in sustainability and shared corporate social responsibility. But it definitely doesn't replace those, and it complements all aspects of those. And I think I'll leave it there. I'm in the red.
You're in the red. Excellent.
Thank you.
Melinda.